The memory of the truck's grill filling my vision was sharper than any pain I'd ever known. The squeal of tires, the impact that shattered my bones, and the cold, rough asphalt against my cheek. It was all so vivid. But sharper still was the image that preceded it. My own son Julian clinging to the arm of a woman named Isabella Cruz, his face a mask of pure disgust as he looked at me. "Why are you here?" he had spat, his voice cutting deeper than any physical wound. "Why are you ruining my family?" And beside him Liam, my husband, stood in silence. His inaction was a confirmation, a final verdict on a life I had wasted on them. I died on that street, surrounded by the opulence of the Sterling family's estate, a filthy old rat driven into the gutter. But when I drew my next breath, I was not in the afterlife. I was back in our small sun-drenched kitchen in Oak Haven, the scent of wild mushrooms I had just gathered still clinging to my clothes. I was back on the day the Sterling family came to take him away. The hum of luxury car engines was a familiar drone in my ears, a sound that had once heralded both hope and despair. Through the window I saw the line of black vehicles clogging our narrow dirt road, looking as out of place as swans in a pigsty. My husband, Liam Sterling, was in the yard teaching our son Julian how to write Chinese characters. He was always teaching him something, things I could never grasp. Julian's brush stopped mid-stroke, a blot of ink spreading like a dark omen across the rice paper. But Liam remained perfectly calm. "Julian," he said, his voice even and measured the way it always was. "I told you before, writing is training the heart. Your heart must be steady." I watched from the doorway, my basket of mushrooms heavy on my arm. I had lived this moment before. I knew the script. The Sterling family, a powerful clan from the city of Meridian, had finally found their lost son after 6 years. Liam, who had washed up on the riverbank near our village with no memory, was their heir. Last time my heart had been a frantic bird beating against my ribs. This time it was a stone. Cold and still. After the initial tearful reunion, where Liam's mother in her designer clothes had taken one look at me and screamed as if seeing a monster, they left, promising to return the next day for him. Liam told them he needed to pack and that he would be bringing 2 people with him. The villagers whispered, their voices thick with envy. "Oh, Ilara, you're about to go to the city and live in wealth. Your suffering is over." They had forgotten. They forgot how I found Liam broken and feverish and dragged him home on a rickety cart. They forgot how I nursed him back to health, how I gave up my best farmland to grow medicinal herbs to pay for his medicine because he was useless, a useless stray, as they called him. They forgot how my reputation was shredded for housing a strange man, and how he, out of a sense of obligation or perhaps pity, had married me. Our wedding was small. We handed out red-dyed eggs. For a time he was mine alone. But that man was gone. The man in my yard, with his innate nobility shining through his simple clothes, was Liam Sterling. When I returned from selling my mushrooms in the village, the scene in my own home was a perfectly crafted portrait of a happy family that I was not part of. Isabella Cruz was teaching Julian English. Her voice was soft and melodic. "You have to study hard, Julian. Children your age in Meridian are already fluent." Julian listened with rapt attention. "You're so smart, Aunt Isabella." "Nothing like..." He trailed off, glancing at me. "Nothing like me," I finished for him, my voice flat. "She only knows how to speak with a country accent. If you talk like that in the city, everyone will laugh at you." Julian had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but Liam, who was reading a book by the window, merely looked up and gave a gentle, complicit smile. It was a beautiful, warm scene. And it was a lie I had seen play out to its bitter end. Isabella was also from Oak Haven. Her mother died young, her father was a drunk, and she was sent to the city to be raised by relatives. She had returned a year ago, a polished, elegant creature who seemed to shed light on how coarse I had become. She had saved Julian once when he fell in the river, and from that day she had woven herself into the fabric of my family. I remembered the first time she saw Liam. She had looked at his tall frame, his long, clean fingers holding a brush, and her eyes had gleamed with a calculating light I was too naive to recognize. "Mr. Sterling," she had cooed, "you are such a learned man. Ilara is truly blessed." The hidden mockery in her words was a poison I drank every day. I would stand there, awkward and silent, while they discussed poetry and philosophy, things from the books Liam read, books that put me to sleep. The chasm between us, which I had once blamed on my own simplicity, now seemed like a wall he had been happy to maintain. I set my basket down and picked up a half-finished sachet I was sewing, stuffed with herbs to ward off mosquitoes. Julian's legs were always covered in bites. He saw me and scowled. "Mom, when we move to the city there won't be any mosquitoes. You don't need to make those ugly things for me and Dad anymore." "Yes, I thought in my last life I cried as I stuffed these into your hands, and you threw them out the car window before you even left the village." "I'm not making them for you," I said calmly, not looking up from my stitching. "I'm making them for Lily." Lily was a little girl in the village who wasn't charmed by Isabella. She liked the way I smelled, she said. Like fresh earth and life. Julian's face contorted in confusion and frustration. He was used to me fighting for his attention, being jealous of Isabella. My indifference was a language he didn't understand. He stomped his foot. "You're so mean. I'm going to find Aunt Isabella. She's taking me to town to eat Western food and teach me how to use a knife and fork." He shot me a defiant look. "You've never eaten Western food, have you?" "No," I said, pulling the needle through the fabric. "Never. Go ahead." He stared at me, waiting for a reaction that didn't come before running out of the house. The silence he left behind was a blessing. Liam finally stood and walked over to me. He noticed my basket filled to the brim with pine mushrooms. "Ilara," he said, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "Why are you still doing such hard work? We already have money now." The words were so familiar. In my last life, this small show of concern had been enough to make me hope. Now I saw it for what it was, a shallow salve for his own conscience. "I'm used to it," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "When I'm free, I have nothing else to do." I continued to sew. Each stitch was a suture closing the wounds of my past life. I was no longer sewing for a family that despised my offerings. I was sewing for my own future. That night, as I lay on my side of the worn wooden bed, listening to Liam's even breathing, I made my plan. He would leave tomorrow. He would take Julian and Isabella just as before. But I would not be here when or if they ever looked back. The money he would offer me, the phone he would leave, I would take none of it. It was all a chain designed to keep me tethered to this village, to a memory of them. The moon cast a silver path through the window. Once I thought that path led to him. Now I knew it led away. From now on, the moonlight and the wind would have nothing to do with Liam Sterling. My life was my own. The morning of their departure dawned bright and clear. I was already awake, having slept little. There was a strange, buzzing energy in the air, a mix of anticipation and finality. I moved through my morning chores with a detached efficiency, packing a small bag with my few valuables. My mother's jewelry, my embroidery tools, the secret family recipes for salves and tinctures, and the money I had saved from selling my mushrooms and needlework. Liam watched me, a faint line of confusion between his brows. He had expected tears, perhaps pleading, or at least a somber, clingy sadness. My calm practicality was disconcerting him, and that small, petty part of me that was still the woman he had broken felt a sliver of satisfaction. He approached me holding something in his hand. It was a little bird, expertly woven from reeds. In the early days of our marriage, when we were happy, or when I was fool enough to believe we were, he would make these for me when I was upset. I had kept every single one, treasured them in a wooden box like they were made of gold. Now I looked at the offering in his palm and felt nothing. Not anger, not nostalgia. Just a hollow emptiness. He gave a faint, awkward smile. "We're leaving today. Are you still upset?" I almost laughed. Upset was such a trivial word for the cataclysm of my first life. I remembered a time I had been upset because he and Isabella had fallen asleep talking in the yard. He had scolded me then. "Why are you making such a fuss? What will people think of Isabella?" Those words had hurt more than a slap. Now they were just a relic from a story about a foolish woman. "I'm not upset," I said, turning back to my packing. He didn't seem to believe me. He sighed. "Then give them to me." I frowned. "Give you what?" "The sachets. It's inconvenient to take the pillows, but the sachets are small. You must have made extras for Lily. She can't possibly use them all." And there it was. Even now he assumed my entire world still revolved around them. He thought my sharp words from yesterday were just a new form of pouting, that I had still spent the night diligently making trinkets for him and our son, waiting for him to notice my efforts. I looked him directly in the eyes, something I realized I had rarely done since his family arrived. "There aren't any left," I said, my voice clear and steady. Not a single one. I sold them. His composure cracked for a second, genuine surprise flashing in his eyes. You sold them. My embroidery is very good, I stated, a simple fact. People pay well for it. Before he could process this, Julian came bursting in, pulling Isabella by the hand. Dad, let's go. The cars are here. Isabella, ever the picture of gentle grace, wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. Look at you, so excited you're sweating. My eyes locked onto that handkerchief. It was one of mine. I had embroidered it for her as a thank you for saving Julian, back when I still believed her to be a friend. On it, I had stitched a pair of hummingbirds, their wings shimmering with iridescent thread I had sold a precious ginseng root to afford. Give that back to me, I said, my voice cutting through the cheerful chatter. She froze. What do you mean? I embroidered that handkerchief. Return it to me. A laugh bubbled out of her, light and condescending. Something like this. Alara, if you take this to the city, people will only laugh at you. But if you really want it back. She made a show of daintily handing it over as if disposing of garbage. Julian's face twisted with obvious disgust. That expression, whether in my past life or this one, was a knife to the heart I thought had already turned to stone. He was ashamed of me. Ashamed of my coarse hands, my simple clothes, the humble beauty I could create. Liam, ever the peacemaker, lifted Julian into his arms. Say goodbye to your mom, son. Julian, still sulking from my earlier indifference, turned his head away and buried his face in Liam's shoulder. My eyes stung, but I refused to let a single tear fall. I had cried enough for a lifetime. As we walked out into the yard, Liam noticed the empty chicken coop. What about the poultry? Weren't you the one who valued them most? He was right. I once had. They were my livelihood. But he had always hated the smell, the noise. He preferred the quiet, flower-filled courtyard of Isabella's house, where they would sit under the grape arbor, sipping tea and talking about things I wouldn't understand. I sold them, I answered calmly. I'm about to leave, so of course I needed to settle everything. He chuckled, a strange mocking sound. Well, I gave you plenty of money. You don't need to raise those things anymore. $1 million is enough for you to buy a nice house in town. The arrogance of it took my breath away. He thought my entire life could be bought off and tidied away. Urged on by Julian, they finally got into the sleek black car. Julian still refused to look at me. Liam rolled down the window and handed me a cell phone, something he hadn't done in my first life. My indifference had, perversely, made him more generous. If you miss us, you can call. I took the phone, a cold, sleek object in my palm. I knew I would never use it. I also knew I would never touch the money in the bank account he had set up for me. It was blood money, payment for my silence and my absence. Goodbye, Julian, I said softly, my words meant only for the son I had once known. The convoy pulled away, kicking up a cloud of dust that swallowed them whole. I stood there until the last glint of sunlight on chrome disappeared around the bend in the mountain road. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by the chirping of sparrows and the whisper of the wind through the pines. I turned and walked back into the house that was no longer my home. It was just a structure now, empty of the ghosts that had haunted me. I picked up my pre-packed bag, which was noticeably lighter than the burdens I had carried for so long. I took one last look around at the simple wooden table, the faded curtains, the hearth where I had cooked countless meals. There was no nostalgia, only a profound sense of closure. Ilara, I whispered to myself, your new life has only just begun. I walked out of the door, not looking back. I did not take the road to the county town where they would expect me to go. Instead, I took a narrow footpath that led deeper into the mountains, a path that would eventually lead me to a remote bus route, and from there to a freedom I had only ever dreamed of. I was a leaf detaching from a withered branch, finally ready to see where the wind would take me. The world beyond Oakhaven was a vast, noisy, and exhilarating blur. I used the cash I had saved from my mushroom and embroidery sales to buy a bus ticket headed south, towards the coast. I had no specific destination in mind, only a pull towards the ocean, towards something boundless and untamed, the complete opposite of the confined life I had known. After 3 days of travel, the air changed. It grew heavy with moisture and carried a new, briny scent. The bus crested a hill and I saw it for the first time, the sea. An endless expanse of shimmering blue that stretched to the horizon, meeting the sky in a soft, hazy line. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I got off in a small, bustling fishing town called Seabreeze. It was a place of weathered wood and brightly painted boats, of shouting fishermen and the shrieks of gulls. It was nothing like the quiet, oppressive silence of Oak Haven. Here I was anonymous. No one knew me as the woman who had picked up a stray aristocrat. No one knew me as the abandoned wife. I was just Alara, a woman with a bag and a determined look in her eyes. I found a tiny room for rent above a noisy fish market. It was cheap and the smell was overwhelming at first, but it was mine. For the first week I did nothing but walk along the shore, feeling the coarse sand between my toes and the sea spray on my face. I slept when I was tired, ate what I wanted, and answered to no one. The sheer, unadulterated freedom was intoxicating. But I needed to live. I took out my embroidery tools and the few sachets I had brought with me. I set up a small makeshift stall on a blanket near the tourist boardwalk. At first, people passed by with barely a glance. But then a woman, her skin tanned and weathered by the sea, stopped. She picked up a sachet I had embroidered with a stylized wave pattern. "This is beautiful work," she said, her voice rough but kind. "What's in it?" "Herbs," I explained. "Lavender, mint, and a few local ones I foraged. They keep moths away and smell fresh." He bought it. Then another woman bought one. And another. My simple, functional art, which had been scorned by my own family, was appreciated here. The money I earned was mine, earned by my own skill with no ties to the sterling name or fortune. With my new earnings I invested in better threads and fabrics. I began making more elaborate pieces. Delicate handkerchiefs with seashell motifs, wall hangings with scenes of the fishing boats at dawn. They sold faster than I could make them. One day I remembered the secret skincare recipes my mother had taught me, formulas that had been passed down through generations of women in my family. They required rare herbs and oils I could never have afforded in Oak Haven. But now with money in my pocket I could. I spent days in the hills surrounding Seabreeze, foraging for the specific plants I needed. I bought pure oils and beeswax from the local market. In the quiet of my little room I began to experiment. I created a facial cream from sea buckthorn, calendula, and camellia oil. I made a toner from witch hazel and rose water. I started using them on myself. The years of sun and wind and hard labor had left my skin rough and weathered. But slowly, under the care of my own creations, it began to change. It became softer, smoother, the dullness giving way to a healthy glow. The lines of worry around my eyes seemed to soften. I looked in the small, cracked mirror one morning and saw a glimpse of the young woman I had been before hardship had worn me down. Not the village beauty, but a woman with clear, bright eyes and a quiet strength in her face. The women who bought my embroidery noticed. "Alara, what have you been doing? Your skin looks wonderful." I started giving them small samples of my creams. Soon they were coming to me not just for embroidery but for my magic potions. I earned enough to rent a small, proper shopfront with a room in the back. I painted the walls a clean, fresh white and arranged my wares on simple wooden shelves. I called it simply, Alara's. My life was full. My days were spent creating, talking to customers, and walking by the sea. I was happy in a way I had never thought possible. The memory of Liam and Julian became like old photographs, faded and distant, evoking a sad nostalgia but no longer a sharp pain. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, my absence was causing ripples in a world far away. Liam Sterling lay on a luxurious king-sized bed in the Sterling estate in Meridian. The mattress was softer than any cloud, the room temperature perfectly controlled. But he couldn't sleep. The silence was deafening. He was used to the sounds of the village at night. The chirping of crickets, the rustle of the wind in the bamboo, the occasional lowing of a cow. Here there was only a sterile quiet. He tossed and turned, a strange restlessness gnawing at him. He missed the scent of the herbal sachets I used to make, the ones that had filled our humble home with a clean, earthy fragrance. The sandalwood incense that permeated the estate was suddenly cloying and heavy. He spent the first few nights in Meridian staring at the ornate ceiling, a vague sense of loss haunting him. Julian was struggling too. The rigid formality of the Sterling household was a shock. He was scolded for his table manners, for his posture, for the way he spoke. He missed the simple hearty meals I used to cook where he could eat with gusto. Here every meal was a performance. One evening, after a long day of etiquette lessons, Julian came to Liam, his lower lip trembling. Dad, my legs hurt from standing so straight. Liam tried to massage them, but his touch was clumsy and unfamiliar. You're not doing it right, Julian whined. Only Mom knows how. He looked up at Liam with wide, pleading eyes. Tell me a story. The story about you and Mom. Liam, taken aback, began to speak. He told Julian about how he had been found, injured and memoryless, and how I had saved him. She wasn't afraid of anything, he said, his voice growing soft with a memory he had long suppressed. She was beautiful too. So fierce and alive. As he spoke the words, he was forced to confront the truth. He had once loved that fierce, alive woman. He had loved her enough to marry her. But as the years had ground her down, as she had become coarse from constant work and worry, he had let that love turn to disdain. He had allowed himself to be charmed by Isabella's polished ease, forgetting that my roughness was a testament to the battles I had fought for him and for our son. A resolve hardened within him. He looked at Julian. In a few days we'll go visit your mother. But when they finally returned to Oakhaven, the house was empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of me. My spirit was gone. The neighbor said I had left the same day they did. The phone and the bank card were neatly placed under my pillow, utterly untouched. In that moment, standing in the silent, dusty house, Liam felt the first true chill of panic. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't me waiting to be coaxed back. I had vanished. And for the first time, Liam Sterling understood that he had lost something precious, something that no amount of money or power could ever get back. A year passed in Seabreeze. My small shop had become a local institution. Women from all over the county came for my embroidery and my skincare products. I had even hired 2 local girls to help me, teaching them the basics of embroidery. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. The woman in the mirror was confident, her eyes held a light of their own, and her smile came easily. It was on a quiet afternoon while I was sorting through a new shipment of silk threads, that a man walked into my shop. The bell above the door chimed and I looked up with my customary greeting, which died on my lips. He was tall and well-dressed in a city suit that looked out of place among the rustic shelves of my shop. But it was his face that stole my breath. He had the same strong jawline and intense eyes as Liam Sterling. This was a relative. Can I help you? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. He gave me a charming, practiced smile. I certainly hope so. My name is Marcus Sterling. I'm the deputy manager of the Lumina Cosmetics brand, under Sterling Corporation. He looked around the shop with an appraising eye. I've heard remarkable things about your herbal formulas. I'm here to see if we can do business. I'd like to buy the patent rights. My blood ran cold. Of course. The Sterling Corporation had its fingers in every pie, including cosmetics. My success had been just large enough to appear on their radar. I had built this life with my own 2 hands, and now the shadow of that family was falling over it. I'm not interested in selling, I said, turning my back to him to arrange some bottles on a shelf, my hands trembling slightly. Please, ma'am, he persisted, his tone becoming wheedling. Just hear me out. The offer would be very generous. You could live comfortably for the rest of your life. Think of the people your products could help on a larger scale. I turned back, my expression stony. My answer is no. To my astonishment, he didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the counter, his smile turning boyish. Well, if I can't sign the contract, my father will cut off all my allowance. You'd be saving me from a life of poverty. He was joking, but there was a thread of truth in it. He was clearly the playboy of the family, sent on this errand to prove his worth. I remained unmoved. That is not my problem. Yet he stayed. He rented a room in the town and began appearing at my shop every day, offering to help. He was useless at first, fumbling with boxes and confusing orders, but he was persistent. He was also a flirt, his compliments flowing as easily as the tide. I kept my face a mask of calm indifference. My husband and son were both doomed by me, I told him flatly one day, using the same excuse that had worked on the village matchmakers. Haven't you heard the rumors? My fate is harsh. Instead of being deterred, his eyes lit up with intrigue. I'm a risk-taker, he declared. I let him stay if only because he was, as I told myself, free labor. But a small, treacherous part of me was amused by his antics. He was so different from the stern, reserved Liam. He was all surface charm and easy laughter. One day he was on a video call, his back to me. Cousin, I'm still here, he was saying, his voice strained. Once I wrap this up, I'll come back. She's a tough nut to crack. By chance, I walked across the back of the shop, entering the camera's frame for a split second. The line on the other end went dead silent. Then a cold, familiar voice that sent a jolt through my entire body came through the speaker. Ilara. It was Liam. You've made me search so hard for you. The connection was cut. Marcus looked at me, a mixture of guilt and shock on his face. The game was up. The next day they arrived. A sleek, dark car pulled up outside my shop. The door opened and Julian tumbled out, running into the shop before I could even react. Mom, he cried, throwing his arms around my waist and holding on tightly. Dad and I finally found you. In the past, he had only ever clung to Isabella that way. The feel of his small arms around me was a physical shock, awakening a deep maternal ache I had worked so hard to bury. Then Liam stepped in. He looked older, more tired, but his bearing was as regal as ever. His eyes swept over my shop, over me, taking in the changes. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a burning, possessive confidence as they settled on me. It's been a year, Ilara, he said, his voice low. I've been searching for you for a year. Aren't you done being angry? Finding me shouldn't have been easy, I thought numbly. They didn't have a single photograph of me. I had been erased so completely from their lives. I gently, firmly pried Julian's arms from me. The action felt like tearing out a part of my own soul. You've mistaken me for someone else, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Julian's face crumpled, his eyes filling with tears. Mom, do you not want me anymore? Liam's frown deepened. He thinks about you every day. Sometimes he dreams of you and wakes up crying. Ilara, he's your own flesh and blood. How can you be so heartless? Heartless. The word was a spark on the dry tinder of my memories. When it came to cruelty, how could I ever compare to them? To the image of them standing together, a perfect family unit, while I was driven away like a stray animal. Just then Marcus, who had been watching the scene with wide eyes, suddenly blurted out, She's Ilara? The sister-in-law you've been searching for. He looked from Liam to me, a dawning comprehension on his face. But she told me her husband and son had been cursed by her fate. Liam's face darkened instantly, a storm gathering in his eyes. Marcus, however, seemed to find a sudden backbone. He shrugged. If that's the case, maybe you two were never meant to be. Cousin, don't force what isn't fated. Liam shot him a look of pure ice. You don't want that new sports car anymore, do you? Marcus hesitated for a second, then clenched his jaw. A car can always be bought again. But if you lose your wife, you'll never win her back. The words hung in the air, stark and true. They seemed to pierce straight through Liam's composure. He was furious. She is your sister-in-law. Then why is she here all alone? Marcus shot back, his chin lifted in defiance. Enough. I finally spoke, my voice slicing through their ridiculous confrontation. The sound startled both of them into silence. Both of you get out. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but Liam, his expression thunderous, forcibly dragged him out of the shop. But before he left, Liam did something that shocked me. He pushed Julian gently back towards me. Wait for me, he said, his eyes locked on mine with an unsettling intensity. I'll come back. And then they were gone, leaving me alone in my shop with the son I had vowed to forget, who was now looking up at me with a mixture of hope and devastating confusion. The bell on the door chimed, signaling the departure of Liam and Marcus, and a heavy silence fell over the shop. It was broken by a soft sniffle. Julian was standing a few feet away, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. The part of me that was still his mother, the part that had sung him to sleep and nursed his fevers, screamed at me to gather him in my arms. But the ghost of the man he would become, the one who had looked at me with disgust, held me back. He seemed delighted to be left with me, a torrent of words suddenly pouring out. He told me about the endless, boring lessons, about the tutor who smacked his hands with a ruler when he made a mistake. He talked about the big lonely house and the strict rules. Aunt Isabella doesn't care for me, he mumbled, scuffing his shoe on the floor. She's always with Grandma, trying to make her happy. She doesn't tell me stories anymore. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and pleading. I missed you so much, Mom. My heart twisted. So that was why he missed me. Not out of genuine love, but because life in the Sterling estate had been miserable for him. He missed the comfort I provided, the unconditional sanctuary. He was still the same selfish child, seeking the easiest port in a storm. In my past life he had eventually adapted and found that comfort in Isabella. Now that it wasn't available he had circled back to me. But he was still my son. The memory of his past life cruelty was a powerful shield, but the sight of his trembling lip was a potent weapon against it. I couldn't bring myself to drive him away. "Are you hungry?" asked my voice stiff. He nodded, a tentative smile appearing. "I want red bean soup like you used to make." I didn't have any prepared. I didn't spend my days cooking his favorite foods anymore. I looked at him for a long moment, then picked up the phone and ordered takeout from the noodle shop down the street. When I set the container in front of him, his face fell with such profound disappointment that I almost felt guilty. "I don't want this," he whined. "It's that or nothing," I said coldly. "If you won't eat, then stay hungry until your dad comes to get you." He sulked but eventually picked up the chopsticks and began to eat, every bite a silent protest. I watched him, this boy who was a stranger to me, and felt a profound sadness. The bond between us was broken and I didn't know if it could ever be mended or if I even wanted it to be. 2 days later Liam returned alone. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept, but there was a determined, almost feverish excitement in his eyes. "Elara," he said, standing on my doorstep. "I'm not leaving. Our family will stay here. We'll live like we used to." The absurdity of his statement took my breath away. Live like we used to? Did he mean in a small village with him as the humble schoolteacher? He was Liam Sterling, heir to a fortune. And I was no longer the naive girl who would believe such a fantasy. I didn't let him in. I simply pushed Julian toward him and began to close the door. "No rooms left." "Sorry." The click of the lock was a final, decisive sound. I leaned against the door, my heart pounding. I heard them outside, their murmured conversation, the sound of their footsteps as they lingered. In my past life I had been the one standing for hours, watching until their car vanished, my heart breaking with every second. Now the tables were turned. Let them understand what it felt like to wait for someone who would not come. But Liam was stubborn. He didn't leave Seabreeze. He rented a small, cramped apartment nearby. During the day when I held my embroidery classes for the local women, he and Julian would show up and join in, pretending to be earnest students. It was a surreal sight. Liam Sterling, whose long, elegant fingers were meant for holding pens and paintbrushes, clumsily trying to thread a needle. Julian, frowning in concentration as he attempted a simple stitch. They were both terrible at it, but they were trying. They were trying to make the very sachets they had once scorned. Sometimes, when I looked up from helping one of the other women, I would catch Liam gazing at me, his expression unreadable. I knew why. I was wearing a simple but elegant blue cheongsam I had made myself, and I had pinned my hair up. The sea air and my own creations had given me a glow that hard labor had stolen. I was beautiful again, and I could see the dawning realization in his eyes. The realization that he had thrown away a pearl and chased after a fake. I paid them no mind. I treated them as I would any other persistent nuisance. They were passers-by in the life I had built. Half a month into this strange new routine, another ghost from my past appeared. Isabella Cruz. She stood outside my shop, clad head to toe in designer brands, a vision of urban wealth that was as out of place in Seabreeze as a peacock in a henhouse. When she saw me, her eyes widened in shock before narrowing with a venom I knew all too well. "Elara," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You've changed so much." Her gaze swept over my shop, my clothes, my face, and her tone turned mocking. "No wonder you managed to seduce Liam to the point he doesn't even want to go home or care about the company." At that moment, Liam walked in from the back room, having brought in a new shipment of boxes for me. He heard her. "What nonsense are you spouting, Isabella?" His voice was cold, colder than I had ever heard him use with her. She instantly switched tactics, her face morphing into a mask of pitiful concern. "Liam, since you haven't gone home, your mother's illness has relapsed." Liam's expression didn't soften at Isabella's performance. If anything, it grew harder. "Stay by her side. That's enough," he said, his tone flat and final. "Why don't you just focus on playing Victoria?" he added, referring to his late sister whose likeness she bore. The words were a dismissal, a brutal stripping away of her perceived status. Playing Victoria meant she was nothing more than a living monument, a comfort for a sick woman with no real claim to the Sterling name or legacy. The moment Mrs. Sterling recovered, Isabella would be an outsider again. I saw the color drain from Isabella's face. The carefully constructed facade of the gracious, destined matriarch cracked, revealing the desperate woman beneath. To go from the brink of unimaginable wealth to being relegated to a mere companion was a fall she could never accept. Suddenly she spun on her heel, her designer shoes scraping against my clean floor. She didn't look at Liam. She looked at me, and with a dramatic flourish she dropped to her knees. The local women in my class gasped. Her voice broke, a masterclass in manufactured agony. "Alara, please. I'm begging you. Let Liam go." Tears, real or feigned, welled in her eyes. "Because of you, he's fighting bitterly with his family. He refuses to return home if he can't take you with him. My uncle's blood pressure has spiked from anger. My aunt can't handle the shock. The company is suffering. Please, for the sake of the family, let him return." The audacity was breathtaking. I had fled. I had built a new life, a world away from them. They were the ones who had hunted me down, who had shattered the peace I had carved for myself. And yet, in her twisted narrative, I was the seductress, the homewrecker, the one who wouldn't let him go. I felt a cold fury settle in my veins. I looked past her kneeling form, my eyes locking with Liam's. He looked torn, angry at her theatrics, but also, I could see, uncomfortable with the truth in her words. His family was in an uproar because of him. Because of me. "If you don't leave," I said, my voice low and clear, cutting through her sobs, "I'll sell my patent to Venora." The air in the shop stilled. Even Isabella's crying hitched. Liam's face went pale. Venora was the Sterling Corporation's most vicious competitor in the cosmetics industry. My herbal formulas, the very ones Marcus had been sent to acquire, were potent enough to be a game-changer. If they fell into Venora's hands, it would be a catastrophic blow to his family's business. He knew I wasn't bluffing. The past few weeks had shown him a woman of steel and resolve, a woman who had walked away from everything without a backward glance. If the well-being of his own son couldn't sway me, the Sterling Corporation's profit margins certainly wouldn't. I saw the moment he yielded. It was in the slight slump of his shoulders, the way the defiant light in his eyes guttered out. The unshakable Liam Sterling, who had always held all the power, was finally being checkmated, and by the woman he had considered beneath him. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something raw and unguarded in his gaze. Not possession, not calculation, but a profound, bewildered loss. "You hate me that much?" he asked quietly, the question meant only for me. I shook my head, the cold fury receding, leaving behind only a vast empty plain of certainty. "I used to," I said. "In my last life, when I died, I thought that if I could ever meet you again, I wouldn't save you. Not kicking you while you were down would already be enough." I saw him flinch, but I continued. "But this past year I focused on my work and cared for myself. I've become better. I realize there's nothing left to hate. I rarely even think of you anymore." I met his eyes, holding his gaze with a steadiness that seemed to unnerve him. "Because the truth is, I don't love you anymore. Hate isn't the opposite of love, Liam. Forgetting is." The words hung in the air, a final, absolute verdict. He stood there, absorbing them, and I watched as the last vestiges of his hope crumbled to dust. He had come here expecting to find a heart he could win back with persistence. He found a fortress with the gates permanently sealed. Finally he nodded, a short, jerky motion. He turned to Julian, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide, frightened eyes. "Get your things, son. We're leaving." Julian began to sob, great, heaving cries that tore at the shreds of my maternal instinct. He ran to me, clinging to my legs. "No. Mom, don't make me go. I'll be good, I promise. I won't complain anymore." His small hands fisted in my dress. The memory of my past life death, of his disgusted face, flashed before my eyes. But this was a child, my child, begging not to be sent away. The conflict was a physical pain in my chest. I couldn't forgive them. I couldn't go back. But I also couldn't be the source of such utter desolation in his young eyes. I knelt down, gently prying his fingers loose. His face was blotchy and tear-streaked. "Go back with your dad," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "You can come again during summer break." He looked up at me, his grip tightening. "What if I come then and you've already left?" he whispered, his fear a palpable thing. The question held the echo of a lifetime of abandonment. I held out my pinky finger. We'll make a promise. I won't go back on it. He linked his small pinky with mine, a fragile thread of trust. I stood up and looked at Liam. His face was a mask of stoic defeat. Thank you, he said, his voice hoarse. Then he added, the words sounding like a vow torn from his very soul, Elara, I won't give up. But as he led a sobbing Julian away, I knew he was wrong. He had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. After returning to Meridian, Liam Sterling finally resolved to do what he should have done years ago. He went to Isabella's suite in the east wing of the estate. She was arranging flowers, looking every bit the lady of the manor. You need to leave, Isabella, he said without preamble. She froze, a white lily in her hand. Leave? Liam, what are you talking about? But, what about your mother? Her voice was a practiced blend of shock and concern. I've already spoken to the doctor, he replied, his tone flat and devoid of its former gentleness towards her. Her condition is improving. Most of her illness was caused by my disappearance. From now on, I'll be the one to stay by her side. The flower dropped from her hand, petals scattering on the polished floor. The mask finally slipped completely, revealing the raw panic beneath. Where will I go? What am I supposed to do? You can't just throw me out after everything. Liam's gaze was cold and deep, the gaze of a man who had finally seen through a long con. A person, he said slowly, should never covet what doesn't belong to them. In that moment, standing in the opulent room she had come to see as her own, Isabella was consumed by a scorching wave of regret. If she had known that the worn-out village woman she had so easily sidelined would transform into the captivating, independent beauty Elara had become, a woman who could make Liam Sterling turn his back on his own family, she would have acted differently. She should have accepted when Mrs. Sterling offered to take her in as a goddaughter. But she had been greedy. She had wanted it all. Now it was too late. Liam's determination was ironclad. But his father, the elder Mr. Sterling, was a far greater obstacle. He summoned Liam to his study, a room paneled in dark wood and lined with portraits of stern ancestors. This foolishness ends now, Liam, he boomed, slamming a hand on his desk. This obsession with a peasant woman, it's beneath you. You will marry someone of equal status, someone capable and well-matched. The daughter of the Chin family has just returned from abroad. You will meet her next week. For the first time in his life, Liam defied his father not with quiet resentment, but with open, unshakable resolve. No, father. My wife is Elara. My son's mother is Elara. The argument was vicious, a clash of two immovable wills. In the end, his father played his final card. If you choose her, you are no longer a son of this house. Liam's answer was to turn and walk to the family's ancestral hall. He knelt on the hard, cold floor before the tablets of his forebears. He knelt there for 3 days and 3 nights. He didn't speak, he didn't eat, he only knelt, a silent testament to a choice that had come a lifetime too late. On the morning of the 4th day, he collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration. The Sterlings couldn't bear to lose the air they had just regained. The spectacle of his devotion, however misplaced they believed it to be, was too powerful to ignore. When he woke in his bed, weak and pale, his father was standing by the window, his back to him. Do you really believe she will ever come back to this house? The old man asked, his voice tired. Liam's voice was a ragged whisper. I don't know. Then is it worth it? Nearly killing yourself for a woman who wants nothing to do with you. Liam closed his eyes, the image of me in my shop, calm and self-possessed, floating behind his eyelids. I have to be the man who is worthy of her choice, he breathed. Whether she ever chooses me or not, that is a consequence I will bear. It was not an answer his father could understand, but it was one he was forced to accept. The battle was won, but the war, Liam knew, was far from over. Back in Seabreeze, my life settled back into its peaceful rhythm. True to his word, Liam began bringing Julian to visit during his school breaks. I didn't welcome them with open arms, but I didn't shut the door in their faces either. I maintained a polite, almost clinical distance. I watched them, trying to discern if their newfound fondness was truly for me, or merely for the light of independence and success I now carried. My heart had died in my past life. It could not be so easily warmed back to life. Liam, in a turn that was both baffling and oddly endearing, began to learn how to cook. He who had never so much as boiled water in Oakhaven, would stand in my small kitchen, frowning at a recipe book, attempting to recreate the simple hearty dishes I used to make. They were often oversalted or undercooked, but he persisted. Julian no longer found me annoying. Instead, he followed me around the shop, peppering me with questions. "Mom, I saw you on a local business feature on TV. My classmates all said my mom was beautiful and cool." The unhidden vanity in his voice was still there, a remnant of the sterling entitlement, but it was tempered now with something that looked like genuine pride. One day he told me, "Aunt Isabella is gone." The woman the Sterling family had once expected to become their matriarch had vanished, leaving no forwarding address. Suddenly, I was reminded of my past life, and a question I had never dared to ask bubbled to the surface. I looked at Julian, my head tilted. "Do you really think your mom," I asked, "a woman from a remote village, could ever handle being the mistress of the Sterling family?" He didn't even hesitate. He smiled, a bright, easy smile that reminded me of the little boy he'd once been. "Mom," he said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, "whoever you are, that's exactly what the mistress of the Sterling family should be." The words were flattering, but they landed on the barren ground of my skepticism. They were the words of a child in love with a new version of his mother, and a man intoxicated by a memory he had only just begun to cherish. I had clung to such sweetness in my first life, and it had sustained me through years of neglect. I would not make that mistake again. I heard through the grapevine via a suddenly chatty Marcus what had become of Isabella. Accustomed to wealth and luxury, she could never return to a simple life. She had latched on to a wealthy industrialist in his 50s, only to be publicly humiliated and stripped of her possessions by his wife. After that, she drifted from one wealthy man to another, a ghost of her own ambition, her beauty fading faster than her fortunes. Meanwhile, I lived my simple, fulfilling life. I kept a distant, lukewarm relationship with Liam and Julian. Our village was remote, but business was business. I eventually sold the patent for my herbal formulas to the Sterling Corporation, not for a flat fee but on a generous, lifelong profit-sharing basis. Who, after all, doesn't want to make money? Liam handled the negotiations himself. The contract was fair, and it secured my financial independence forever. It was a final, clean severance of the strings of obligation. Liam never remarried. Both at home and in his office, he hung my photographs, old, grainy ones from the village that I didn't even know existed, and a new one taken secretly by Julian of me laughing in my shop. Everyone in Meridian knew I was his one and only wife, the great, unattainable love of his life. And so, things stayed like that year after year. A quiet, unspoken stalemate. The invitation came on heavy, cream-colored stock, embossed with the Sterling family crest. Julian's coming-of-age ceremony. It was accompanied by a separate handwritten note from Julian himself. "Mom," it read, "all these years you didn't want to come home and we respected your wishes. But this is my ceremony. Please, I want you there." The words were simple, but they tugged at a deep, complex chord within me. I thought back to my past life, to the same event that had been the stage for my ultimate humiliation and death. The emotions were a tangled skein of silk, grief, bitterness, and a strange, detached pity for the woman I had been. Liam and Julian came to Seabreeze to personally escort me. Julian, now a young man of 18, stood nearly a head taller than me, his youthful features hardening into a handsomeness that was all sterling, but his eyes when he looked at me held a cautious, hopeful warmth that was new. "Will you come, Mom?" he asked, his voice deeper, but still holding a trace of that childhood uncertainty around me. Liam stood behind him, silent. He had aged well, the lines on his face adding a gravity that suited him. He didn't press, didn't plead. He simply waited, his eyes holding a question he no longer had the right to ask. I looked at my son, at the ghost of the little boy who had clung to me, and at the man he was becoming. I looked at the shop I had built, the life I had forged with my own hands. I was no longer the woman who could be broken by their world. I was Alara, the business owner, the artisan, the woman who had chosen herself. In the end, I went with them. The Sterling estate was just as I remembered it from my first life. A sprawling, intimidating monument to wealth and power. But this time I did not enter as a shabby, unwelcome intruder. I arrived in a car driven by Liam, wearing a gown I had designed and embroidered myself, a deep emerald green that echoed the pine forests of Oakhaven but was cut with the sleek, modern lines of the city. My skin glowed, my posture was straight, and my eyes held a calm, unassailable peace. Because of my presence, the banquet was even grander than it had been in my previous life. The rarely seen mistress of the Sterling family was finally making an appearance. The ballroom was a sea of glittering jewels and curious, assessing stares. I saw the memories of my past life overlap with the present. I saw the spot where I had been standing when Julian had rejected me. I saw the path I had been driven down towards the waiting truck. But the feelings were distant, like echoes from a story I had read long ago. Guests flocked to toast me. Powerful men and elegant women vied for my attention, their curiosity thinly veiled behind polite smiles. I smiled back, a faint, graceful curve of my lips, and accepted their greetings with a dignity that came not from my name, but from my own unshakable sense of self. I saw Liam watching me from across the room, a strange, wistful pride in his eyes. He saw that I was not overwhelmed, not cowed. I moved through his world not as an imposter but as an equal on my own terms. Julian found me later, his face flushed with happiness and champagne. He slipped his arm through mine, a proprietary, proud gesture. "Everyone says you're the most beautiful woman here," he whispered. I patted his hand. In this life, his affection was not a lifeline I needed to survive. It was simply a gift which I could accept or refuse. And tonight I chose to accept it. Later, as the party swirled around us, Liam approached me. The music was soft and the terrace doors were open to the cool night air. "Thank you for coming, Alara," he said. "It means everything to him." I nodded, looking out at the manicured gardens. "He's my son." There was a long silence. The unspoken words hung between us, a lifetime of mistakes and regrets. "I was a fool," he said finally, his voice low. "I had a treasure in my hands and I threw it away because it came in a plain box." I turned to look at him. The moonlight silvered his hair and for a moment, I saw the ghost of the man I had loved, the man who had woven me grasshoppers and promised me a future. But the love was gone and in its place was something else. A quiet respect, a hard-won peace. "The box wasn't plain, Liam," I said softly. "You just never bothered to look inside." He had no answer to that. He simply bowed his head, accepting the truth of it. I stayed for the duration of the ceremony, playing my part flawlessly. I was gracious, I was charming, I was the picture of a serene matriarch. But my heart was already back in Seabreeze, in my little shop by the sea, in the life that was wholly and completely my own. When it was time to leave, Julian hugged me tightly. "You'll visit again, won't you?" "Perhaps," I said, and this time the promise was not a chain, but a simple statement of possibility. Liam drove me back to the airport. As I got out of the car, he said, "The door will always be open for you, Alara." "Always." I smiled, a genuine, gentle smile. "I know. But my home is elsewhere now." I walked through the airport terminal, a single woman with a small bag, but I carried a whole universe within me. I had lived 2 lives. In one, I had poured my entire being into others and been left with nothing. In this one, I had learned to pour into myself. The plane soared above the clouds, heading back towards the coast, towards the scent of salt and freedom. I looked out the window at the world below, so small and full of possibilities. I had faced the ghosts of my past and had not been found wanting. I had both my freedom and the respect I had once craved. I leaned back in my seat, a quiet contentment settling over me. A woman must live her life for herself. And finally I was. The end.